Happy October, everybody, and welcome to the couch in my apartment. October is now upon us, and so we are coming on to the Halloween season. A lot of horror channels like to celebrate the Halloween season by releasing a video every day in the month of October, and so I decided to be incredibly original and do the same thing. So for the month of October, I wanted to celebrate my favorite decade of horror, and that is the 1970s. I've always loved 1970s horror. It's been my favorite decade for horror for such a long time, ever since middle school. And the reason this is my favorite decade is because this is really when horror started to become grittier. It started focusing more on domestic horror. There were still horror movies that took place off the beaten path, but there were also horror movies that took place in civilization. Horror became much closer than in older horror movies. You didn't have to wander away off the beaten path to find something deadly. So I wanted to celebrate October by ranking my top 31 favorite 1970s horror movies. We're going to do something incredibly novel. We're going to start at number 31 and go all the way to number 1. You're going to get a video every day for the month of October. These aren't going to be full-blown reviews. I'm just going to talk about why I like these movies, maybe add a little more detail. Some of these movies I've already done reviews for, and some of these movies I would like to do full reviews in the future. But this is just for fun, just to recommend some horror movies to you for this Halloween season, and just celebrating my favorite decade of horror. So let's get started with the beginning. The beginning is always a good place to start. At number 31 we have A Bay of Blood. The first Italian horror movie on this list, and you're going to see a few more as we go on. A Bay of Blood was directed by Mario Bava, who many people consider to be the Italian Hitchcock. He was very influential to Italian horror. And not just Italian horror, but American horror as well, especially with A Bay of Blood. Those who are into Italian horror and those who are into horror, they know that A Bay of Blood was a heavy influence on the slasher genre, especially the Friday the 13th series. The movie takes place on a lake. We have bloody, bloody kills, made with really good practical effects, not just for 1970s, but even for now. A lot of Italian horror fans would put Bay of Blood higher on the list, and yes, I do love the movie, but seeing as this is 1970s horror, it was very hard for me to come up with a top 31, and even harder to come up with them in some kind of order. Like, my top 10 are pretty easy, but everything after that was really difficult. And number 31 was the hardest to do. I think whenever you make a list, the last spot on the list, picking the movie for the last spot on the list is always the hardest, because you have to pick, okay, what doesn't make the cut? What movie that I love does not make the cut? And there were a lot of 70s horror movies that I had to leave off here, and it broke my heart. But luckily, Bay of Blood managed to go on the list. Picture a Friday the 13th movie, but done with a bit of an artistic flair. I love the Friday the 13th movies, and many of my fellow horror fans love that series, but we can admit it's a pretty basic slasher movie. A lot of them are basic slasher movies. You're there to watch people get naked and get killed. But Bay of Blood, there's more of an artistry to it. It came out in 1971, and again, you can see the influence that it had on Friday the 13th. Mario Bava was a former set designer, so he always loved to show off his sets, and he always loved to show off his locations. And that is very common in a lot of Italian horror movies. They love to show off their locations. A lot of Italian horror movies are set in beautiful locations, and that helps add a little to the movie. A lot of the really good kills happen in the first act of the movie, where we're following a bunch of horny teenagers, but then, as all of them get killed, we then switch gears, and it becomes this story about who's inheriting this lake property.
I really came to find out about my father's disappearance, not to hear moral judgment passed on him.
Absolutely beautifully shot. It's a fantastic horror movie, and one of the best Italian horror movies out there. One of them. We will have more in the future.
Oh, Albert, it's my father.
You didn't know anything, huh?
Oh no, Albert, it's horrible.